I do what I'm told.
Do you?
Yeah, occasionally.
That'd be interesting over the next 40 minutes.
I'm going to take the microphone out of my pocket, otherwise it'll be very uncomfortable.
As long as you keep it on, and they can all hear you.
Sit there. Okay.
I just thought, by way of introduction, just to tell you that Sir Martin and I have been speaking to each other for many, many years. In fact, I was trying to work out the first time I've been speaking to you, and I remember at Davos, 2007, I think it was, and I'd been on air for about 3.5 hours in -20. CNBC don't give you a heated set. And my arm was like this, and Sir Martin was one of my latter guests in the show. And you were doing one of your longer answers. Sir Martin occasionally has, and my arm was literally stuck like this, and literally it had frozen in position by the end of your second answer. And that was a decade ago, so it's at least a decade.
Your tongue wasn't frozen.
No, and neither was yours, and we're hoping it's not today as well, because we have many, many things we can discuss. In fact, I didn't give your people a list of questions.
No.
Because I don't.
Okay.
But obviously, we're looking at new realities of a whole host of issues, which I think has given me carte blanche to pick your brain on a whole host of issues.
There's not much to pick, but we're
not going to talk about our cricket club, but we are going to talk about other stuff. And I just started writing down the big changes, whether it's Trump, whether it's Amazon, whether it's the digital ad space, whether it's the broader business environment. Mm-hmm. You made a very big and wrote a decently long essay last year about why corporates are not spending money and how they should be spending money. And maybe we'll get onto a bit of European politics as well, and Brexit, which, despite expectations, is providing better numbers based so far for WPP.
Well, yes, you look at the UK, probably the two countries which in the last 6 to 9 months have been pretty good. One would be India, and one would be the UK. And you know, if you said to me, why do I think the UK is better than one would have expected? I think I think the irony about this is that clients, because of the uncertainty, are not investing in fixed capital equipment. So, you know, plant and to expand capacity, but what they're doing is tickling up the top line by investing in branding or making a commitment to branding, believing that they can do something about the top line in the UK in difficult circumstances. And of course, it's a variable cost in their mind, wrong word that they shouldn't use, but a variable cost, which next year, if things turn down a bit, which probably look as though they will, they can pull in their horns. Okay. So I think the irony about all this is that the UK is a little bit of a laboratory for what we think should be happening, because unfortunately, as my colleagues at H&K, we've got a number of other WPP companies here, what we see is this focus on the short term, which no doubt we'll come back to, which I think is a real problem. I think this is the real issue at the moment, and you would see this, you see it all the time, is that cheap money has resulted in a misallocation of resources. I mean, people buying 1% of a company and trying, you know, today, Nestle, which is our 4th largest client, is making its presentation. Mark Schneider is making its presentation today. I see L'Oreal, which is another big client of ours, also made a statement today about its strategy, because the two are interlinked because of Nestle's holding and the death of the big owner of Nestle as well has brought that into sharp perspective. But if you look at the pressure that's being exerted on Nestle, or our second largest client, Unilever by the Kraft Heinz, different group, 3G, and then the third largest client, Procter & Gamble, under attack from Nelson Peltz. Now, it's interesting. I mean, are we off the record here or not?
Well, this is actually going out. I understand.
Oh my God!
Facebook and elsewhere. So everything you say, I think it's pretty much
I have to be a little
record.
bit secretary, but so I won't go into the gory details. But just something. So you know, we did our half-year statement with you, and in it we talk about the reasons why there's pressure on spending, particularly packaged goods spending. And in it we say that the activist investors, you know, are sort of focused on the short term. And I get this note from one of the activist investors, so one of the leading ones, saying, Martin, we're very disappointed in you, that you would think that, you know, we're not interested in marketing spend. In fact, we're really interested in marketing investment, using the right word, not cost or spend. And I write back, and this is on late on a Friday evening. I remember I'm at home in London, and we're emailing one another. And I said, well, look, whatever you think, the Pavlovian reaction to your incursion into the company and the other companies is to cut spending. And unfortunately, cheap capital has built these pools of money, whether they be a Peltz or a Loeb or an Aikman or whoever, and then you've got the 3G zero-based budgeting pressure as well. Different different source of pressure, but with similar results. The reflex Pavlovian reaction to those two groups is to cut spend.
But it goes back a stage earlier, and we can talk a lot more about the activists, and we're definitely going to talk about the consumer products company. But this is the new reality, I think, and I've tried to dig into this in some detail, on air and off air, comes from another new reality, which is not necessarily the rise of the activists, but the rise of Amazon, the rise of Alibaba.
Digital disruption. I think
when these guys come in, just before, but they come in and they destroy the profit margins of their competitors without making a profit themselves, which is, again, a very contentious issue, which then puts pressure on those companies and the guys, Mr. McMillan over at Walmart, will get everyone back to Arkansas, to all his wholesalers and say, 15% off across the board what I pay or you're lost to us. And then those people, whether it's the Nestle's, the P&G's, the Unilever, of course, two of those very important for you, they come back and say, we have to cut our budget spend. And this is what P&G are doing aggressively.
Well, at the end of the day, even that area of the world, it's a bit different. I mean, sort of backing up for a minute, I think there are the three big areas. The first is digital disruption. Right? The second is let's call them the activists, and the third would be the ZBB groups, which tend to be a little bit more long term because they're in business for the long term. Although a lot of people say that they focus just purely on cost cutting. The digital disruption thing has been there for a long period of time. I mean, this new if we call it the new reality has been in place since that weekend in September of 2008, the Lehman weekend, or even before that, the subprime mortgage pressure in 2007, August 2007. Now, we came out of that, and the remarkable thing about 2010, I mean, 2009 for us was a dreadful year. Our top line was down by -8%, like for like. 2010, we saw a sort of V-shaped recovery. We didn't hit a record in 10, but we did in 11 and 12 and 13 and 14 and 15 and 16. 17 is a much tougher year. So something has happened, I would say, around this time last year. We started to see some pressure on the top line, on our top line, in Q4 of last year. It wasn't really tough in Q4 of last year, but we started to see some downward pressure. Q1 and Q2 of this year, and you've seen our numbers for July, or top line numbers, we saw continued pressure. So what is the reason why it changed? I think the reason it changed was that the low growth, low inflation, low pricing power, focus on cost economy had been there since 2009, since post-Lehman. You know, our clients managed their businesses, and we managed our businesses well, even in a low growth environment, even with the digital disruption that you referred to. And I think what happened is that the second and third areas, the activists and ZBB, started to exert very significant pressure, particularly in packaged goods, but also in pharmaceuticals, because people forget that the Valiant and Endo companies, you know, Valiant was an interesting company, is an interesting company, started by a guy called Michael Pearson. It was basically a pharmaceutical roll-up. He was a partner in McKinsey, had spent his life, you know, advising the pharmaceutical companies, and it was sort of an example of bite a bit, really, because he goes out and starts Valiant, and if you remember, I mean, it did get a very significant amount of momentum. And what was the fundamental thesis of Valiant was a pharmaceutical company which cut R&D spend. Now, to my mind, that was an oxymoron. I mean, a pharmaceutical company that didn't do R&D, I mean, it didn't strike me as being logical. But that was the way it is. Now, that was discredited, and Endo model has been discredited, but it did have a shock reverberated around the pharmaceutical industry, and a shock has reverberated around the packaged goods industry. And I would say the climactic event was on February the 22nd, I think it was, which was the Kraft Heinz bid for Unilever, because that was a $100 billion company bidding $143 billion. So for a company 1.5 times its size, and what the message that sent out, that nobody was safe.
Well, it's a culture shock. I mean, I was at COP21 in, was it December 2015, I think it was, in Paris? Yes, of course it was. And there I was with all the great and the good, and the presidents rolled in and out again. And Paul Polman was holding up a flag for, again, this is a new reality, holding up a flag for, we are green, we have great corporate responsibility, we have sustainability, and this is the new model for a company. This is what Unilever is. We grow at, you know the score, 3 to 5%, 5% on a good day, 3% on a bad year as well. But that's what we do, and we're green. And then suddenly, Paul Polman's comfort world as the savior of the world, this is the great model, I think was completely shaken up by that bid as well. I think someone from the United States said, you know what, we don't care how green you are, we care about the bottom line, and we're coming in with a completely different mantra. So you've got two new realities, which are, I guess is a great theme here, well, clashing. You've got green, which is something you guys have sold via your clients a lot, and you've got these very aggressive cost cutters.
But what you described as going green, or a concern about the environment or social or whatever, is basically, as John Brown pointed out in 1997 at Stanford Business School, a long-term approach.
Hang on, is this the John Brown who led the biggest hydrocarbon company in the world at that stage?
That's right, BP.
Just so I know.
Okay, and what he said was, if you're in business for the long term, you will not offend the environment. So, but the critical qualification was a business for the long term. And I think this comes back to the short term. Now, Unilever's response to Kraft Heinz was twofold. What they said was, we're going to increase our margins by 40 to 80 basis points. And in fact, they've done better than 80 basis points. And we're going to push up our volume growth. You said 3 to 5. There's a really important point here, and let's abstract from Unilever for a minute. Most of the packaged goods companies, if not all, I can think of but one exception, the revenue growth that they're getting, where are they getting it from? They're not getting it from volume, they're getting it from price. Anybody who runs a packaged goods company or senior in a packaged goods company knows that once volumes start to tail off, you're in trouble. Once the number of users, so there are two things that are important to the long-term health of a packaged goods company: innovation and branding.
Well, hang on a second. Then they got an awful lot wrong, because were you with Unilever in 99, 2000?
Sorry?
Anthony Bergman's Path to Growth, was that your idea, that one as well?
No, Path to Growth was...
that was before your time?
That was Niall. No.
That was Niall,
that was
Niall. And
Path to Growth was Niall and Anthony when they were joint chairman.
Yes. So that was
before Unilever had a unified CEO.
Before Paul Polman.
Well, Paul Cheskow was the first singular CEO of Unilever.
But what I'm saying is they've been constantly evolving, constantly looking for a new strategy. And you talk about price and innovation. Well, didn't everyone go for bulk as well? Didn't everyone say the emerging markets is going to be the great saviour for all these consumer package companies? And to be fair, Martin, I'm going to bring it back to WPP as well. It hasn't necessarily given the dividends a lot of people thought it would.
Well, I think that's really wrong. I was going to say unfair, but I thought I'd go in for the jugular and say wrong. Where are the next billion consumers going to come from?
Well, I presume India, China, and emerging markets.
Yeah, it's not going to come from the US, not going to come from the UK, not going to come from Western Europe. Whether the UK is in Western Europe or not doesn't make any difference.
So why are we still talking about 3 to 5 rather than 7 to 10?
Well, the answer is the world economy is growing at a slow pace. The new reality is, post-Lehman, sub-trend, top-line economic growth, GDP growth. I think, all the pundits you have on your program, when I religiously turn on Squawk Box, I'm ashamed to admit
as you should.
Every morning, whether I'm in London or New York, I religiously turn it on. And all the pundits
You're just trying to butter me up now.
No, it's true. And all the pundits you have on the program, mostly to a man and a woman, say the world's economy getting stronger. We don't see that. We see corporates not getting significant top-line growth except in two areas, probably. One is tech, and the other is HMOs in America. If you look at the S&P 500, where is the top-line growth coming from? Tech and some of the HMOs. And the really interesting thing is, we looked at this when we did our half-year results. You look at the last 3 quarters, top-line growth of the packaged goods companies in the S&P 500 is about 2.4% in the last 3 quarters. Price earnings multiples are 22 times earnings.
Yeah, hang on, just going back to 99, 2000 again, you could pick up Unilever at what, 6, 7, 8 times?
22.
Maximum. Now we pay 3 times for the same companies.
Tech companies in those 3 quarters have grown on an average by 8.4%. Price earnings multiple, 22 times.
Unless you're in Amazon, which is on 200.
Yeah, but we'll come back to Amazon in a minute, and Zuckerberg, particularly what happened in the last 24, 48 hours on his decision not to bring in that no voting stock. Because I think it's a slightly different kettle of fish. But basically, something's got to give. Either techs, packaged goods are overvalued, or techs are undervalued, but something has to give. And it was Druckenmiller, actually, the hedge fund guy, at Allen & Company's conference this year that pinpointed this. So he said, I'm long tech, him speaking, and maybe sending us the wrong way, as most hedge fund managers do, and short packaged goods, and long, interestingly, long China and long Chinese tech, which I think is really fundamental. Because having spent a couple of weeks in China 2 or 3 weeks ago with our strategy head, Scott Spirit, we went and saw 30, 31 companies. One point I would make is Chinese technology is, I think, outdistancing to some extent Western technology. We in the West don't want to see China succeed. I mean, when I say we, it's not me, but generally people don't want to see that we're sort of jealous of it.
Well, they want to keep them at the bottom of the value chain, don't they?
Well, yes, but a lot of people say the Chinese steal technology. If that was the case, which I think it probably was the case some time ago, we used to say that about the Japanese, we used to say that about the Hong Kong Chinese, we used to say that about the South Koreans. If that was the case, it isn't the case now. I visited again the Huawei campus in Shenzhen. They have 200,000 people worldwide, 50,000 people on that campus in Shenzhen. I go to see Alibaba in Hangzhou, 15,000 people on that campus. Watch out, those 2 companies, plus Tencent. The fearsome 5, which are the 5 most valuable companies on the planet, Apple, etc. And on our branding surveys that we do with the FT every year, the top 5 brands, all the fearsome 5 are around 500 billion, 600 billion, 650, 700 billion. Which one will be the first $1 trillion company? We don't know. Either, I guess, Apple or Google or Amazon.
Do you want to just put the other 2 in there just for...
Well, I mean, Microsoft is the other one, and Facebook.
Right.
But I would add to them, and Huawei is a private company, but I would add Tencent and Alibaba, who are both nudging up to the 500 billion range. They are the most valuable companies on the planet. The 6th is Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway, interestingly. So this is a very big fundamental change that's taking place and where the value is. But the point I'm making is the packaged goods companies, because of cheap money, because of access to cheap money, I think there's a misallocation of resource because the valuations are extreme because of Kraft Heinz, because of the fear if it can happen to Kraft Heinz, or it didn't happen, but if the prospect of it, it can happen to anybody. Nobody is safe.
Well, let's go back a stage then. A new reality is this abundance of cheap money, the lack of investment as well. Does it change?
This is the really troubling thing. If I asked you, I mean, the likelihood is that interest rates will rise, but will interest rates rise to where they were pre-2008? No.
Everything you and I remember mortgages. Well, if you remember what a mortgage is, remember mortgages of around about 15%.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
So, I remember ERM, we just had the anniversary. I had 2, I was very lucky at the time, 2 mortgages, and I was paying 15%, and I was bust that day. Yeah. So we all remember proper inflation and proper mortgage and proper issues.
And that is why monetary policy is still keyed into trying to moderate inflation, because that's seen.
Are they getting it wrong? Are they creating deflation with the low prices? I mean, they've created bubbles here, deflation here maybe?
I think there is severe misallocation at the moment. I'm not saying that interest rates should go back to 15%, but I think there is misallocation. Come back to the question about the tech companies, the Bezos, Zuckerberg, Brin, Page, the controlled companies. Now, the great thing about the controlled companies is they can take the long-term view. They're not, why is Rupert Murdoch, in my view, maybe not in your view, such a strong strategic player? Because he controls the company. He has 40% of the votes and 10% of the equity. And he knows he can deal without fear or favor. He knows he can make decisions without fear of being pitched out. Same thing is true of Zuckerberg. In fact, Zuckerberg made that comment in relation to his decision, not because the share price had risen so substantially, he didn't have to rejig his corporate structure. I think probably because there are other pressures at the moment, that's the fundamental reason there. But Bezos, you say unprofitable. What Bezos is trying to do is to, I think, establish very strong market share. You see it with...
but when does he stop?
Well,
when does he stop?
Well,
when does he say, do you know what, I can now make some money?
Really, well, he does. If you notice, every quarter or so, when he needs to pump it out a bit, he pumps it out. The really interesting thing I think about Amazon is this. It was Lloyd Blankfein who said, when asked who will be the first $2 trillion company, not 1 trillion, 2 trillion, he said there won't be a $2 trillion company because no nation state, no sovereign state will allow a company to become that big. And here's like yesterday with Ken Arletta in New York, I asked him a question. We had and it wasn't like this, you peppering me with questions. It was 50-50, or meant to be 50-50. And I said to him, is Google too big? And he said from a theoretical point of view, yes. But of course, Google is a brand that is liked by the consumer. Maybe a little bit less liked now than it was 10 years ago when he wrote his book on Google, but still basically liked. And what it does is reduce prices. That's what Amazon does, reduces prices.
But nobody goes to page 3. Nobody goes to page 4 of the search.
The disruption that is being caused in terms of employment. Now, I'm one of those people that believes, this new reality theme. One of the new realities is, in my view, reduction of employment. I mean, you've got disruption, digital disruption in the manufacturing chain, 3D, printing, robotics. You've got disruption in media, Google and Facebook, who account for 75% of digital advertising, which in turn is 30% or a third of worldwide advertising. And then you've got disruption, as you said, in Amazon and Alibaba in retail and distribution. This is massive stuff. What does it mean for jobs?
I was going to say, you don't believe the world is getting stronger. We don't see that, is what you just said earlier as well.
Well, so do you believe it is?
Oh, no, I don't actually. I think there are great issues, but I think they're debt related, and I think they are easy money related as well. But obviously, and you add a layer of disruption on top of that. But people don't want to hear what I think anyway. So
you're probably the most expert because you probably hear more things coming at you.
I'm very lucky. I mean, a couple of weeks ago I was in Edinburgh City, and I was speaking to Margrethe Vestager, the commissioner. And I was saying, you're declaring war on these companies you just mentioned. She goes, no, I love Google. I love Apple. I'm a really big fan of the products. And I think this is possibly the most powerful. I think she's certainly one of the most impressive people on the planet, let alone a woman, in charge of competition policy. And I think she's awesome. And she says, I love the product. She said, I love the product.
Yeah, but two things were really interesting about that. First is, Google had done a deal with Almunia, who was Vestager's predecessor. And I was told, said this yesterday in New York, I was told that if we had any problem with a deal with Google by Almunia, we should sing out. Not that we did anything about it, but I was told by a senior bureaucrat, in the nice sense of the word, in the EU. And then, of course, the deal collapsed. And why did the deal collapse? I think the deal collapsed because of the pressure from the German publishers. There were two things that happened. Matthias Dörpfner wrote an editorial in the Frankfurter Allgemeine criticizing Google. That was one thing. And then at the Google camp in Sicily, the very first one, which I didn't go to, but my wife went to, Dörpfner had a breakfast with Eric Schmidt. And everybody who was there came away saying Schmidt lost and Dörpfner won on that thing. And I think that created an atmosphere and environment where Almunia made a recommendation. Somebody in the Council of Ministers said, no go, and it cratered. Now what do you have? Despite Vestager saying she loves Google, she's sent down one decision where they've been fined. There are 2 more to come. And one of the reasons I think Google has become more flexible, somebody said to me, are they still a frenemy? And I said, we had a hangout with them last week. And I said to James Rosenthal, who's the guy at Google who looks after our relationship, he said, are we still a frenemy? And I said, well, you're probably more like MasterCard. I think it was MasterCard who said flexible friend.
A bit like Boris and Hammond, isn't it, really? Or Boris and May, maybe?
No, I don't think it is. It's not as fundamental as that.
But just a quick question, though.
No, it isn't. No, because really important point. Google...
I'm not asking that many questions.
Google, $90 billion of Google revenue comes from advertising. And, it was actually really interesting. In preparation for the Kennel letter thing I did yesterday, I went back and looked at his interview with Eric Schmidt in 2008, when Eric projected that Google would be a $100 billion company. And he was right, because they're up now to 90, and this year they'll go through 100. Just under 6 of it comes from us, out of a media book of 75, and it's our biggest media investment. And Facebook last year was number 3 at just under 2 billion. This year it'll be well over 2 billion. It'll probably be equal to Murdoch, or probably maybe even surpass the Murdoch nexus of Star and Sky and News Corp and the Wall Street Journal, et cetera, and Fox, et cetera. But the point I'm making is that this is really a very fundamental change, dependent on advertising.
So let's go back to WPP and this frenemy case with these people. Are these people, or they have been eating a large portion of your lunch? We add that to what we said about the consumer products companies who are potentially, and P&G's one, I think I read just earlier, what is it? They're trying to take $2 billion in costs out of their entire...
actually 10 billion is
but $2 billion out of the marketing side.
Yes, 2 billion...
10 billion costs, 2 billion of that comes in the marketing side in the next 5 years as well. So my question for you is, the new reality of where Google and Facebook are, regardless of their frenemy or not, are they changing WPP?
Well, 40% of our revenues comes from digital. So the answer is yes, they are changing. Are they, you said, eating our lunch? I don't think so. Are the consultants eating our lunch? I don't think so in terms of head-to-head digital, but are consultants going in and saying, we think you're spending too much money, you're the CEO of XYZ company, I'm Accenture or Deloitte, come in and say, Steve, you're spending too much money. We'll come in and reduce
on their fees.
Yeah, and
Deloitte's fees rather than WPP fees. Yeah.
Look, without going right into the gory details, there has been an amazing example of a consulting company getting a contingent fee in a recent case that came up in a country just recently, where they got a contingent fee based on their savings. So it was productivity savings, and we'll get in that case it was $80 million they got as a contingent fee. And that's an example. So they come in and they say, we'll cut your fees. And of course, one of the areas they look at is marketing. In the short term, margins are improved. In the long term, it's a question about whether volumes will grow and the pressure. So I don't think Facebook and Google eat our lunch. I think there's a mutual sort of ecosystem there based on...
Should you recoil in horror when I read things like P&G cut $100 million in digital marketing costs in the second quarter, probably read the same article, and actually they saw no decline in sales?
Yeah, no, but hold on a sec. Look, first of all, Facebook is which is what they were referring to, is a branding mechanism more than it is a sales mechanism. Search and Google is more of a direct connection to sales. You can't tell if you cut your spending in Q2 by 130, 140 million, whatever, you can't tell at that particular point in time how much damage or advantage you get. It's a longer term game. The real pressure, I think, in digital, and we've seen a little bit of a bump in the upfronts in the US in the last few weeks, a little bit of it. Nothing to get excited about if you're CBS or NBC or ABC, but a little bit of a bump as we've seen digital under more pressure. But I don't talk to CEOs that much, but a little bit. But in the last few weeks and months, a number of them have said to me, look, we know that we spend a lot on digital. we think we might spend too much, we think we might do, but we don't cut the spend because that's the way that we are moving our spend. And even though we think we can measure traditional better than we can measure digital, we still keep with that digital spend.
Let's talk about another new reality, and this is consumerism and the actual consumer themselves. We've talked about how the consumer products companies are reacting to digital change. Now, I wrote a tweet the other day, which will probably upset, all of you. It was about millennials, and I said the millennials in the queue to buy $1,000, $1,000 phone are the same millennials. I was just trying to wind people up.
Didn't I hear on your program this morning that the suppliers of the Apple X are, the suggestion is the parts that are being asked for are not quite as great as people thought they were going to be?
That's very interesting, because they've held off on the 8, haven't they? But the tweet went on. It was only 140 characters, and you still wouldn't let me get it out. And it went on that the same millennials who were buying this £1,000, $1,000 phone were the same millennials who were moaning about not having a mortgage, not being able to buy a car, not being able to pay down their student loans. And it was trying to be provocative. I could have said it about any of my friends, to be honest, who are certainly not millennials. But my point is consumer habits have changed. Everyone wants it now as well. The debt profile of people has changed. People are happy to take on big personal finance deals to buy now, buy cars, buy everything. So consumerism trends generally, what's the biggest one that's a new reality that you are saying is exciting or worrying?
Preferences have changed. I mean, you said a few minutes ago you had a mortgage at 15%. Now, millennials may not want, here are two people talking about millennials who aren't millennials, but millennials may not want that fixed burden. They may prefer other things. I mean, one of the most interesting things is the preferences for holidays, the preferences for travel. At a time, preferences for sharing, right? Now, if you ask that question about what's the biggest trend, I mean, I was watching a little video of the CMO of our second largest client, who said, Keith Weed, yesterday was interviewed at Adweek in New York yesterday, and he said the issue of trust. So I would say that's probably fair. Obviously said in the context of the sort of thing you were saying about pull and going green or stressing the environment and social, etc., and government. But I would say probably the trust issue is probably the biggest issue that, whether it be in politics, whether it be in business or whatever. So I would say that's one. But the other stuff, the sub-trends, or not sub-trends, but probably equally important at the end of the day, is this question about ownership versus sharing. The sort of things, the values that you and I had, my dad would say I remember you reminded me, my dad went absolutely bananas with me because I took out a mortgage for $8,000. I bought a flat just very near here, just on the corner of Regent's Park, Nottingham Terrace it was. It cost me £11,000. And I took out a mortgage for $8,800. I put in a deposit of £2,200. I can't remember what the interest rate. I think the interest rate was probably about 8 or 9%. 25-year mortgage with a life insurance policy as well.
Oh, well, those lovely ones here. Never paid out.
That is not. That sort of inflexibility, tying yourself up, burdening yourself, I don't think is reality.
Because they can't as well.
So, but an X phone is, or a phone, or a holiday, or sharing, or mobility, is, it gives them much more flexibility, which I think is actually a very good thing. And it's something that you see to an amazing degree in the American economy. Just to the point, after Lehman, we had adjusted our US cost base. We had an 8% compression on the top line in 2009. We'd adjusted our US cost base within, I would say, 3 to 6 months, because the whole mentality of the US in relation to cost adjustment is totally different. Here in Europe, what are we now? 8 years after? We're still adjusting our cost base. What Macron is trying to do in France is, in my view, absolutely fundamental. I mean, the flip side of it is retraining, training programs. If people are put out of work in established lines of production, the car assembly lines or whatever, you have to retrain them. So that's the quid pro quo or the quid pro quid. But essentially, I mean, the flexibility in the US economy is still, to my mind, a marvel. Although, from a political point of view,
yes,
it has become, a very controversial.
Let's go on to that in a minute. Let me gauge. I'm going to give you guys some time at the end, but I want to get. Are there many questions for Sir Martin? You don't have to ask them now. I just want to gauge if anyone wants to put their hand up if they are going to ask Sir Martin a question. If not, I'll just carry on.
Don't be
spouting
shy.
on. There'll be one up there. Anyone else is going to ask? There's another one at the back there. Okay, so I'm just going to ask a couple more, and then we'll let you get your questions in. Politics, United States. You
Yes.
talked about trust as well of corporates, which I think is, I couldn't agree more, by the way. I think it's an absolutely key issue, and I think a lot of trust and from clients and former clients such as Volkswagen, I think trust has been shot to pieces in many ways. What about trust in the political system, trust in our political masses? We've seen this vox populi swell up. It swelled up on Brexit, it swelled up with Trump. It came to the fore in Greece. Renzi came and went. Macron is the new hope. Germany, we have a weakened Frau Merkel now, so it seems as well. But let's start off with Trump if we can first, and maybe we'll finish on a bit of Brexit at the end. But
yeah.
What's Trump done to the world? I mean, the feeling is that he's lessened the trust in the political process, which was already fraught anyway with the Republican-Democrat battles, and hasn't led us to a better place yet.
Well, you use the word yet, and I think that's the key. I mean, I did get a little bit more. I heard his speech. I went to the UN and heard his speech, which, funnily enough, I thought was a good speech.
Did you like the Rocket Man bit, or?
Well, Rocket Man, he tweeted before. I mean, I was told that Rocket Man was the only departure from script. That's what I was told. I don't know whether that's true or not. And obviously, I don't know who wrote the speech. Gary Cohn was there in the audience, and I guess he must have had a significant input to it, but I don't think he was the originator of the speech. But look, whoever it is, I thought actually, he took on North Korea, which has to be taken on because it is a severe threat.
In such a bellicose fashion?
He took, well, it's his language. That is his style. He took on Iran, and he took on Venezuela, of course. And he took on the UN. Now, the interesting thing about the UN people is that the senior leadership of the UN actually have quite a good working relationship with Trump, because Trump is trying to reform the bureaucracy, and that's what the new Secretary General and his staff want to do. So there is a sort of ad idem there, which is interesting. Having said that, so I started to get a little bit more optimistic, but picking a fight with the NFL, I don't know. I mean, we were talking about it in the green room. Who wins? Yesterday, Canaletta said free speech wins. Does the flag win, or does free speech win? I read a little item coming here on Fox, what you would expect, said the flag wins. I saw, Jerry Judge, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys, going down on his knee with the whole team last night. That was quite interesting. Because Judge is a big Trump supporter.
Tom Brady, Trump friend, has also disagreed with him.
Right. So what you're starting to see, it's a little bit of a Charlottesville that's developing around the NFL. What happened there was that he criticized an Afro-American head of Merck.
White supremacists, decent people, black athletes, top of their game, should be grateful.
Yeah, well,
doesn't seem like we're on the right page of history.
You and I were discussing, why did he do it? Did he do it to divert attention from the fact he won't get health care through again? Because he now has 3 Republicans against him, so he can't win 52. He's 52-48. He can't win. Is that the reason, or are there other reasons? We don't know what's bubbling along in the surface with Mueller and the Russian investigation, etc. I mean, that is, the elephant in the room. And we have to wait and see. I mean, somebody said to me that Mueller comes to work every day determined to basically nail the president.
Not to do his job.
To nail the president was what was described as to me. So we don't know what is going to come out of that, and we have to wait and see. I mean, it's difficult to judge. If Trump could just moderate his tweets or his behavior, if he could just moderate it and focus, let's put healthcare reform to one side for a minute, but could focus on tax reform, could focus on regulatory reform, could focus on infrastructure investment. I saw David Calhoun recently, who's used to be the head of Nielsen, has gone to Blackstone and is heading there, or is responsible for their $25 billion infrastructure fund. which you can leverage up quite significantly. He said it's going to take a long time, and it's going to be long term, but it will make a big difference.
Of course.
So all that stuff, and the regulation stuff, he has reduced the regulation. And business, I would say business in America, Business Council, Business Roundtable, is still optimistic about it.
Even though most of them have left his business roundtables and councils.
But that was a hiding to nothing, that, at the end of the day.
Let me, I know this is my final question, I think, because I'm going to let 2 or 3 out. Just give me an update on Brexit. UK's been great for you guys so far, post-Brexit. I think you had some 5% increase stripped out figures as well, which are constant currency. Great stuff. But you've already said you've got a bit of caution about what comes ahead. What does Brexit mean to the people in this room?
Well, I think, I remain extremely worried. I mean, the Prime Minister's speech in Florence on Friday laid out a little bit more flesh on the bones, but the detail is still lacking. And with this internecine strife within the Conservative Party, this political expediency, we talk about trust. Why would anybody have any trust in this lot when it seems to be about personal positioning?
Has the government asked you what you think as a leading British grandee? Let's call you a grandee.
I doubt whether that's the right word. Other people might have other
Because
words.
I've spoken to a couple of men CEOs and who top British companies like yourself, and they say they've had next to no contact with the government. In fact, they've also said, we don't want any contact with the government because they're toxic at the moment. Now, that worries me when they've got tens, if not hundreds of thousands of jobs under their control.
I have been asked on 2 occasions. I've had one session with the Prime Minister at Davos, so that was at the end of January, where she was very much, I would say, on receive rather than transmit. So she was listening. Remember, that was when Nick Timothy was still there. And they were very much wanting to hear. They've been criticised for not listening to business, and they very much wanted to listen to it. So I think the answer, to be fair, is they have made 1 or 2 attempts. But the trouble with government is they expect you to turn up for things, 48 hours in advance, and we have a business to run, and schedules and
then they ask you to sign some silly letter saying how great they are.
Occasionally.
You didn't sign, did you?
I wasn't asked.
How can they not ask you?
Well, probably because they knew the answer would be no. But I wasn't asked in relation to that. That letter, in the end, I mean, was reduced in terms of its significance.
It was a little bit embarrassing, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was unnecessary at the end of the day. But I think, look, I think they do make some attempt. To say they make no attempt is unfair. But do they make enough of an attempt? I think probably the answer is no.
And just very briefly, Martin, what does it mean for these people in the room is what I think we all want to know.
It means uncertainty. And I think, 17%, we have about 16,000 people here in the UK. Let's call it 20%. 20% of them are EU nationals. Tremendous uncertainty. I still don't see that as having been.
Would you move your headquarters overseas again? Would you move your headquarters overseas again?
Back to Ireland?
Dublin, Brussels, wherever you like.
When we had the board meeting to decide, when Cameron and George Osborne said they would enact legislation to prevent, within the life of that parliament, so it was only 5 years, prevent, deleterious tax consequences. We had the board meeting to come back. There were people on our board who said we should stay out. Once out, we should stay out. With the benefit of 20/20 hindsight, they probably were right. But it was an emotional decision. It was it wasn't done for logical reasons. It was done for, hesitate to say this, but for patriotic reasons. Now, would we move again? I doubt it, to be honest with you. But the fundamental problem is this. Germany is our 4th largest market. France is our 6th largest market. Italy is our 9th largest market. Spain is our 10th largest market. As my colleagues at Hill+Knowlton and beyond know, Brussels is an important relationship for us. The EU is an important relationship for us. We do a lot of work for the EU Commission. It's an important client. And I worry about loss of influence. So if you say, what does it mean for our people? There's the uncertainty on being able to, on mobility. There's the uncertainty about influence. I'm sure our French competition are pounding the door at Brussels saying, don't give those limeys any business, or they're against the club, so don't let them benefit as a result of
So you
being
haven't
outside.
buried the hatchet with Publicis yet, then?
or have asked, but no, they wouldn't lose the opportunity to do that. And so I think it's the simple fact that and you know this, the UK pattern of trade has not altered.
No.
Right? When you go on trade missions to Brazil, or less so Russia now, but India or China, it is frankly embarrassing that we do not have better penetration. Our trade patterns are French and German, Italian and Spanish and EU, not BRICS and Next 11. So when people talk about, us becoming a Singapore, I look at, which is I think what they're really actually saying at the end of the day, low tax, flexible, and Singapore is a great example, by the way, great example.
Yep.
If we could move that way, but it needs a complete change in mindset, a much more Germanic mindset to export.
Fabulous. Good place to leave it on that. Right, let's get a couple of quick questions. There was one over there. Let's get this one in
Can we turn the lights up? Is that possible? Ah, good.
He likes to see his victim.
Thank you very much. So, Martin, your thoughts are amazing, and Steve, great interview. If, by definition, the new reality is the new normal, is innovation and branding enough to take us to the next normal? And also, I'd like to add that if Trump wanted to deflect, he might have chosen Puerto Rico instead of the NFL.
That's an observation.
Indeed.
Yeah. No, I can't understand why the president is going. I mean, he was in Alabama. Alabama had a 10,000 people rally when he initiated the NFL thing. Maybe, it's one of these common faults that we see. We think we can isolate a message to a section of the community or the populace, and we can't anymore. There are no boundaries to messages anymore. It used to be, but no longer. So maybe it's that. I've got to say one thing about Trump, which I think is quite. He has, what is the difference between his use of Twitter and Roosevelt's fireside chats, in a sense? I mean, presidents over prime ministers, the great communicators, whether it be a Churchill or a Reagan or whatever, have used communications methods in aggressive ways or advantageous ways. Trump has used Twitter, and I interviewed Jack Dorsey I did my poor man's imitation of Steve in Cologne a couple of weeks ago with Jack Dorsey at D-Mexico. Twitter, for the fact that the president uses Twitter to the extent that he does is quite remarkable, and yet Twitter has not been terribly successful in generating revenues. I mean, it's a question in my mind. I mean, my colleagues here know that Twitter, to my mind, is a public relations medium. It's not easy to monetize that directly in the way they do. I mean, one of the ways might be through subscription. We discussed that actually with Jack. But for all on the president, a real enigma. I don't quite understand why he's doing it. Maybe it's to divert attention, as I said before, from the healthcare issue, and he's getting increasingly frustrated with the lack of progress in that three-part program that I mentioned before of tax, regulation, etc., and infrastructure spending. But we'll see.
So Martin, let's get another very quick question and very quick answer if we can. One up here.
Don't do quick answers.
Hi there, Archie Wilkinson from PaveGen. Thanks for a good discussion. You mentioned innovation and price and the bottom line, likes of Uber. Can and could companies start to measure companies on the triple bottom line, as John Elkington identified in 1994? So people, profit, planet.
Well, I think we over-intellectualize this thing. I go back to John Brown's very simple statement in 1997, so it's 20 years ago. If you're in business for the long term, you won't do things that offend stakeholder communities. Triple bottom, I've got nothing against triple bottom lines and measurement and all that, but at the end of the day, if you're in business for the long term, his analogy, John Brown's analogy was, if you're in the oil business and you don't worry about the environment and you're just focused on the short term, you strip the oil out or whatever it is out of the ground, you don't worry about what you do to the environment, and you just get on with it. If you're in business for the long term, this is the critical factor. We've been at this at WPP for 32 years, and we're in it for the long term. We're in the business of building long-term brands. We're not Johnny-come-latelys. We're not in and out. We're here to build long-term brands. That's the fundamental point. And going to triple bottom lines, I think it was Larry Fink, I was reading a piece this week that he authored. He made the same point as John did, which is it's all about the long term. So if everything you do is in that framework, you won't react, you won't cut your marketing spend. You can juice up profits. If you're spending $2 or $3 billion a year on ad spend, let's say you're spending $2 billion to get the maths easier. It's 500 million a quarter. If I shift 500 million from March the 31st to April the 1st, I have 500 million that drops through to profit in the first quarter. I can monkey around with the numbers in the short term to a significant degree. That may not do me much good in the long term, particularly if I actually cut it completely and I don't respend that 500 million in Q2 or Q3 or Q4. So I think the fundamental point, and this is key, this is why this cheap money has misallocated resources, because it's taken people's attention off the long term and focus it on the short term. And I think that's the key. So triple bottom line, yes. Measurement, yes. But fundamentally, if we get people to focus more on the long term, and it demands a whole change mindset, not just of companies, but of institutions, how they're evaluated. How many fund managers are evaluated on long-term performance? How many are evaluated on quarterly performance? It's the latter rather than the former.
I think we can leave it there. We're only about 12 minutes over, I think, so
right.
We've done pretty well.
Okay,
But just to say, the Lex column the other day, and I'm sure you saw it, actually it was in August, called Sir Martin, The Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog, which was a Caspar Friedrich picture. Did you see it?
I didn't.
You might have had a little look in the cuttings you got in the morning, yeah. But anyway, so thank you for being our wanderer above the Caspar Friedrich. Thank you for being our wanderer above the Sea of Fog, Sir Martin, and it's been great to hear what you've had to think about a lot of things. Thank you very much indeed.